So Keir Starmer has pledged to recognise a Palestinian state at this September's United Nations General Assembly. His recognition comes after President Macron, who didn't really set out any
another great statesman.
He didn't really set out any conditions, but Keir Starmer has used this kind of as a threat against Israel. He said that if Israel doesn't essentially agree to an enduring ceasefire, if it doesn't commit to a two-state solution, then the UK will unilaterally recognise Palestine. He has sort of flip-flopped on whether there are conditions on Hamas, which is, you think
quite important.
The more difficult party to wrangle in, but there you go. What have you made of this, Tom?
Well, I think it's the kind of lightest assessment of it is that it's virtue signalling, but it's virtue signalling with morally depraved consequences. I mean, not only in terms of the blackmail which is being inflicted on a state which is supposed to be an ally, which was nominally supposed to be in support of in its war against a genocidal terrorist outfit, but also because of the fact that this is obviously going to be taken as a reward for terrorism. The sequence of it is undeniable. You have Hamas commit the biggest assault on Jews since the Holocaust, murdering 1,200 people, taking 250 hostages, a pogrom of kind of genocidal intent that took place on that day, on October 7th, 2023. You then have Hamas recourse to what it always does, which is to put its own civilians in harm's way in order to maximise casualties, to try and maximise its propaganda efforts to curry favour with the useful idiot spread all across the world. And then you have, as a consequence of that, a selection of Western states decide to say, now is the time to reward this behaviour with statehood. I mean, it's absolutely horrendous. I mean, it's one of those things where it even kind of grates against the supposedly legalistic tendencies of Keir Starmer. There's been a number of senior legal figures in the House of Lords who've written this letter now saying that actually this would be in contravention of international law in terms of how you would normally go about recognising a state, because there are no agreed upon borders. There is no stable leadership with which to do business. These are details which even the supposedly international law loving Keir Starmer and Lord Hermer are just looking past and completely ignoring. The questions are obvious. What possible leverage you are going to try to use against Hamas? The idea that they're just going to lay down arms and refuse to have any part in a future Palestinian state just because Keir Starmer asked them to doesn't make any sense. Who are supposed to be the kind of the prospective government of a future Palestinian state? You've obviously got Hamas on one side, and then you've got the Palestinian Authority led by Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank, who is currently 20 years into his 4-year term, hated by the population, and is refusing to hold elections precisely because he's concerned that Hamas would win a future election. So it's one of those things where all of these details are deemed irrelevant because Keir Starmer, hated on the domestic scene, wants to posture on the international stage. And it's not even obvious that even if he was doing it for cynical political manoeuvring reasons, that it would have any effect whatsoever. The left of the Labour Party is not impressed by this. They already see him absurdly as some kind of collaborator in genocide. The inner city, say, British Muslim populations who abandoned the Labour Party at the last election over Gaza are not going to be impressed by this. The only people who seem to be welcoming it was that one Hamas former health minister who said this is fantastic because it's putting us on course to a Palestinian state. So it was one of those things where, who is this for? Who is this impressing? So far, the only person we can say is Hamas, definitively. And why he's going down this course, we can understand the cynical or perhaps kind of moralistic reasons for it. But it's very predictable, as Josh's original reaction would indicate. But nevertheless, it's grim that we've come to this point.
Yeah, I mean, we've been sort of moving towards this point, I guess. Keir Starmer's tried to signal, nudge and a wink that he wants to do this, but keeps saying he wants to maximise the impact of recognition. But surely, all he's done is maximise the amount of offence that he's caused to any, decent-minded people.
Look, I don't know much about this, okay, guys? But, no, this is, there's so many angles on this that are totally insane. You've covered a whole bunch of them, and one of them being this afternoon, a government spokesman came out and said, oh, well, we're not putting any conditions on Hamas because we don't deal with terrorists. Like, it's a noble, look at us, we're the UK, we don't deal with, so it's, no, we're going to put the conditions on our democratic ally, like, instead. That's who gets the conditions. and as you said as well, like this idea it's going to make any impact on the ground is ridiculous. Like the UK has any real power. If anything, arguably, the UK do better out of that relationship with Israel. I heard from someone who knew someone who was used to work in the security services. Basically, without Mossad, we would be screwed. Without that information coming in, and also just looking at where in terms of Israeli weapons and development and R&D, it's like to mess with them as an ally, it hurts the UK more, arguably, and also just in terms of pissing off Trump. For it's just it's such a, so if it's not going to make an impact over there, then it's purely about UK politics and the cynicism of it and what a stupid decision it is. It sort of baffles me. I mean, someone says there's that saying, Starmer, but anybody, he's clever but an idiot or whatever. It's like that. It's to not be able to read the situation in terms of how it's all accelerated. My personal theory is just sort of seeing it play out in real time. Was the Hamas have just been sort of pumping out propaganda for even since the beginning, but over the last year and a bit, particularly of these kids with disabilities, with congenital diseases or conditions, and if there was starvation, this starvation narrative has been an ongoing thing, but it just built up so much. Oh, and it's not to say that there wasn't genuine hardship. Yeah. But in terms of this idea that of people actually starving to death, everyone's got a mobile phone out there. You would see you've still got all these obese adults. You'd see it. And all we saw and all we have seen are these photos of these kids with these conditions. So I personally think that where the Rubicon got crossed was the Express putting that picture on the front page last week with a kid in a plastic like black bin liner as a nappy, which actually is in itself fake because there's loads of photos of him with nappies from the same photo shoot. And then because of that, and the Express, which is, I guess, it's seen as a sort of right-wing paper, but the idea that for me was that crossing a line, then it sort of gave they know that these photos are they're not fake, but they are
misrepresented.
And then of course it gave everybody permission to do that. Even the Daily Mail did this massive feature about them. No one actually revealing that this kid, to anyone who's got eyes, and certainly to anyone who has any understanding of the conflict, would go, that's a child with medical conditions. And then obviously and then the New York Times, and then they put it on as well. They put out a little tiny thing to their sub account yesterday with that they've got 55 million followers or something like that, and they put it out to their 55,000 or something. It's like they just try to hide this little thing, like, oh, by the way, we just found out that they've got this medical. So anyway, the point is that it feels like you could feel the swell of this false narrative taking over to the point where it either Starmer felt that, and the rest of the government felt that this was the time to exploit that, or they couldn't resist it any further. Yeah. And that's what it feels like.
And there were was it over 200 MPs had written a letter, a third of Starmer's cabinet, and he's obviously a prime minister who has no authority anymore. So it seemed that on this issue, like many others, he was just bound to buckle, but with, as you said, with quite terrible consequences. It's extremely morally depraved what he has decided to do.
Absolutely. And I think the tendency to make incredibly historically important foreign policy decisions, I mean, it's not going to have an immediate impact on the ground, shall we say, but in terms of a shift in terms of where the British government stands on the question of Israel and Palestine, this is very significant. Just on the basis of domestic political consumption is a horrific way to conduct yourself. I think it's something that supposedly the wiser heads, supposedly, of the Labour Party, freed from ideology and whatnot of either the Brexiteers or the Corbynistas, they were supposedly not going to engage in such kind of shallow politics. But time and time again, you have politicians who are weak, who are disliked on the domestic front, who turn to the international stage in order to try and get plaudits, a sense of mission, a sense of substance. And it seems like whether or not this is actually the right thing to do prove secondary to that in this case as in many others.
And it's going to be the opposite. Of course, it's the opposite thing to do. I should say, I am Jewish. I somewhat have skin in the game. I want there to be two states.
Yeah.
But of course, under this circumstance, these circumstances is ridiculous because you still have 50% of the Palestinian population supporting Hamas, supporting what happened October 7th. There has to be a radical de-radicalization of the general population. We are still dealing Hamas. They are jihadist Islamists. It's a religious war for them, and we are here in the West putting our little sort of blinkers on about how it's like Ireland, or it's like it's not the same thing. For them it's a religious war, and it all comes down to the fact that, and I'm certainly not the first person to say this by any means, but once the Palestinians want their own state more than they want to the end of a Jewish state, they will get a state. And it really does come down to that. And he surely must know that. So it just makes the cynicism like 1,000 times worse. That's not going to help what's going on with the hostages. It's not going to help the Palestinians until there's this actual realization of what the problem is.
Yeah.
You can't, this is not the solution by any means. Very annoying.